Back in late March, I made a video saying this. If we're more conservative and compare last Saturday's peak with this Saturday's, bearing in mind that this Saturday has people trying the new war bond for the first time, we see a drop-off of 17% week over week. The war bond was not enough to bring people back. Now, of course, this isn't the end of the world. The game is still top 3, just behind Dota on the charts, so it's a screaming success. But part of what forms wisdom and insight is not only looking at where things are today, but rather looking at the signs and trying to project where they will be tomorrow. My concern was predominantly based on a subtle trend I began to see emerging in the way that the Helldivers 2 devs were balancing the game, and my intuition told me that the focus away from fun and toward the metrics would ultimately push a large chunk of the initial fanbase away from the game. I, of course, didn't want this to happen because I loved Helldivers 2 and thought it could enjoy a rich long-term success as a live service. The Arrowhead CEO recently came out with a similar sentiment on X saying, "Yeah, I think we've gone too far in some areas. We'll talk to the team about the approach to balance. It feels like every time someone finds something fun, the fun is removed." Since that video was made, the transient peak player counts have dropped from the high 300,000s to beneath 100,000. As I make this video, the current player count is just under 28,000. The game has gone from being in the top 5 on the Steam charts to number 27. In March, it had lost 20% of its player base. In April, another 34%, and in the last 30 days, another 40%. While it could certainly be said that this is par for the course and player bases inevitably drop off across the board, it was my hope that Helldivers 2 would settle in and duke it out among the top games like Apex Legends, Dota, and PUBG. When I made the original video in late March, it was a fairly controversial stance to take, but luckily, the Helldivers 2 audience, due to the subject matter of the game, is very much clued into satire, jingoism, and the broader subtext and patterns at play in the world, and was, of course, able to appreciate the natural course of what I'd projected. As a result, we had a very robust, nuanced, and intelligent conversation on the back of it. Looking back, I'm glad we're able to remain cordial and emotionally restrained because it would have been very awkward otherwise to look back on the player count freefall triggered by the same catalysts spoken about back in late March. Helldivers 2 is in an interesting predicament. It is, in effect, a victim of its own success. The servers were bombarded with more connection attempts than the developers had ever bargained for, and it essentially became an overnight smash success. But along with said success came a period where the developers were called to continually put out an array of spot fires. If it wasn't the connection issues, it became the game-breaking bugs and crashes. If it wasn't for those, it came to the game's state of balance. They've had the rather unenviable job of needing to stay on top of all of these concurrently, all the while millions of eyeballs were trained directly on them. Because the total 12 million sales of the game largely dredged the entire gaming public into Helldivers 2, it's fair to say that the community became very incendiary. Every misstep was punished severely, and every point of contention became another battlefield to be fought over across social media. This, I imagine, would make right from wrong very difficult to perceive from the vantage point of the developers. No matter what they did, no matter what balancing changes were made, someone, somewhere, would be upset by them. As a result, it's difficult to maintain an orienting North Star. The last round of balancing changes perhaps escalated this to a nuclear level. One thing I've seen a lot in my comments is people tired of having to fight with their favorite loadouts constantly being diminished. As the CEO said, the moment it becomes fun, the fun is duly removed. For me, personally, I've not logged into the game in weeks. I've felt no desire to do so, and none of my original friends who used to play all day with me have logged on in weeks either. This means that I'm at the mercy of quick play, which 3 times out of 4 makes me worry for the future of our species. This is the exact outcome I worried about back in late March. Ignoring the basic reality before us is not going to help anyone. So, looping back around, we can clearly see why this is now finally being reflected in the player count. I'm convinced if this trajectory continues, the game will see an ongoing player exodus. We can revisit this video in a few months and see whether I'm right or wrong. I could see the signs emerging, compounded by a monthly Warbond release which would not only provide little tangible value to players, but also escalate the game's increasingly complex web of balancing. The Helldivers 2 gameplay loop is extremely repetitive. This, in and of itself, isn't really a problem, as long as that loop is profoundly enjoyable for players. Yet, it seems over the months, it has become increasingly less so. If we're establishing a truth-aligned rubric through which to position the orienting North Star of the game's development process, it would be my suggestion that fun be at the top of the totem pole. Helldivers 2 is a PvE game, fundamentally based around cooperative effort against the environment itself. It doesn't need to be sweaty, and in effect, it's not what the majority of the player base would expect from it. They would expect to simply drop in with friends, with little fuss, and get to the act of blowing things up together and making memories. The more the game is balanced around the metrics of which percent of players regularly clear Helldives, the less fun it's going to become for the 90% who simply don't care, and I believe we're seeing the inevitable result of that. This is of course compounded by the predictable and tired get good crowd, whose general perspective is in effect murder for the long-term success of any property. Balancing a game to appeal to the egotistical shortcomings of infantile players who attribute their competence at a video game to their broader value as a human being is a recipe for disaster. The average gamer is not trying to overcome emotional inadequacies when they drop. They simply just want to have a fun time after a long day spent working, studying, or otherwise elevating themselves in the real world. It's intended as a pressure release valve rather than a means of proving one's adequacy to the world. What's in store for Helldivers 2 across the short and midterm? I honestly don't know. I don't keep apprised of its updates anymore and have very little desire to play, but with that said, much as I did in late March, I still truly wish the developers the best with their game and want to see them succeed long-term as a live service. My hope is that they find their North Star and that it's one in alignment with the majority of players' interests. This way, they can enjoy a robust, growing community while the players get to enjoy creating memories with their friends again.